Welcome in, everybody, to a live reaction show of the second college football playoff rankings for 2024. I'm Trey Reeves, joined by Garrett Turney tonight. And Garrett, we're about 10 seconds away, if the countdown at the ESPN ticker is to believe, from the second college football playoff rankings tonight. We're going to live react to these. Had some things get in the way last week that kept it from being a live show, but I'm excited to get to react to this with another person, number one, and also get to do it pretty quickly after it drops. So here's how this is going to work tonight as Reese Davis is introducing the show. Booger McFarland, Greg McElroy, Joey Galloway at the desk as well. We're just going to live react as it goes, and we're going to kind of shoot from the hip. They're explaining the playoff. Hopefully, if you're watching a live playoff reaction video, you know how the playoff works by now. But if you don't, we'll have the bracket as soon as those names are released. Garrett, what are your thoughts going in? I'm not expecting a ton of changes at the top, but that middle group, I think, is going to have a big shakeup this week.
Yeah, well, depending on what you mean by the top, because I got to see what they do with Miami at this point. I'm really curious to see what they think about the ACC, and I am desperate for some BYU respect. I'm sure we won't get that, obviously, but I'm just desperate for some BYU respect. They've got a better resume than I think a lot of people realize, and it's going to be exciting to see kind of where they come in. Otherwise, I guess it's just kind of flavor of the month in the SEC, and maybe some Indiana respect could be coming our way tonight. We don't know.
Yeah, I guess I should clarify. I'm not expecting at the very top, right? Oregon, Ohio State.
Oregon, Ohio, yeah.
But the top four buys will be shaken up as we have our first set. They're starting at 25. So we have Tulane making a debut at the rankings. I kind of thought that was a good chance. Tulane quietly winners of 7 straight. And we have Army and Missouri at 24.
How is Missouri still ranked?
Dude, their playoff continue. You didn't hear Drink after they beat Oklahoma? They're still alive for the playoff. Well, hey, that's keeping our favorite team afloat in quality win metrics. So we'll take Missouri ranked at 23. LSU comes in at 22. South Carolina jumps into the poll at 21 after knocking off Vanderbilt last week. Any quick thoughts other than the Mizzou slander that you're going to spill with these 25 through 21?
I mean, obviously, look, Missouri does not deserve to be ranked at this point. They have, negative quality wins. I just don't see where they've won a game that really matters. They'll get a chance to, I guess, against South Carolina, which is kind of fun. But, I don't know. I don't have any idea why they're still here. LSU dropping all the way to 22 is a little surprising. I know they got smoked, but that's still a good Bama team. So, I don't know. It's a little surprising to me.
20 was Clemson there at to round out 25 through 20. Louisville checks in at 19, another 3-loss team coming in. Wow. That's obviously they got to be above Clemson because they beat them pretty handily head-to-head. Washington State at 18. And we will see if they flush up 17 before I can trail off my sentence. They will not. So we will wait on that.
Good for Washington State, though.
Good for Washington State. The playoff chances are slim, but they are not zero. Colorado only up to 17. I'll be honest. I was expecting a little bit bigger jump there from the Buffaloes after a big win on the road at Texas Tech, but they check in at 17.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed, it seems like they're really trying to make some of these like Big 12, ACC, like some of those. It really seems like they're trying to make them earn it, whereas there's a lot of benefit of the doubt with some of these SEC teams where like you could be kind of bad most of the year, then you get a signature win, and then you pop back up in the rankings. Colorado's been a lot better, and if you're just watching it, Colorado's been a pretty solid team, but not really getting a whole lot of love. I know obviously 17 is pretty good. And also, like, again, reframing the expectations. Colorado, has been to this point kind of a perennial, bottom feeder. Here they are at 7-2, and, they're up, at 17, and that's a good spot for them.
Texas A&M checks in at 15, down 1 on a bye week. The dreaded bye week will get you, apparently. They'll make you drop.
They will. They got a lot worse on that bye week.
Lot ahead of the Aggies there at 15, just 3 spots out. So now we'll get into the bracket reveal here, and then we will talk through that. The first and second team out will be up first here. Not a lot of surprises so far. A lot of 3-loss teams in the top 25, which theoretically means you're still alive. SMU will be the second team out at 14. They were 13 last week, so I guess they're dropping on a bye week as well. Whatever. Boise State drops a ranking as well to 13, but that means they will be the 12 seed still as the top G5 representative. So pencil that in.
So you tell me number 12 is not a G5 team?
Number 12 is not a G5 team, apparently, but this will open up the door to the number 12 team being left out of the college football playoff. So we'll see who that is here in just a second. Georgia out.
Georgia, the first team out right now.
Georgia, the first team out. That is massive.
Wow.
Massive news. And honestly, kudos to the committee for making Georgia earn their way back in. That's huge, Garrett. I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I saw it come up, I think, just a split second before you did over here. As soon as I saw Georgia hit that, I was like, wow. Look, I get it. They lost an embarrassing game to Ole Miss on the road, and they haven't looked that good this year. They've had some clear struggles. They do have a signature win in Austin. That's a big deal. But they don't have as many of those, big-time wins as they normally do, and they haven't been winning in the same dominant fashion. I think making them play themselves back in is probably appropriate at this point.
I think you're right, and I think they do have the best win. There's Ole Miss at 11, right on top of the Georgia team that they just beat. They're doing a good job of valuing head-to-head. I think that's just a side note here.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia falling all the way out. They were number 3 last week, I think, in the rankings. So number 2 seed because they jump Ohio State. So falling 9 spots to the 12 to be the first team out due to the G5 auto bid. Yeah, I mean, they might have the best win out of anybody other than Oregon in the entire thing, but there's a lot of question marks. And if you just go by the old eyeball test and the head-to-head, because they're going to have to put Alabama in here somewhere, it makes sense for Georgia to have to win their way back in. And there's Alabama at number 10. This SEC logjam is going to be something to behold as we sort this out down the stretch.
What I'm going to notice here, I think, is that it seems like they're reluctant to take a lot of these SEC teams out of the playoff and, completely remove them from playoff contention. But it doesn't seem like they're valuing them nearly as highly as a lot of people would expect. They're not putting them up in those top, 5, 6, 7, 8 spots, right? They're keeping them down towards the bottom. I think that that's warranted. I think that that's fair. And I'm going to say good for the committee for doing what I think is probably the right thing.
Miami checks in at number 9, but that's good enough for the 4 seed. So as the 4th highest conference champion, if you guys know this by now, if you're watching, again, a college football playoff reaction show and not watching the main show, they are the 9th ranked team in the top 25, but that's going to be good enough to be the 4 seed. The 9 seed will be number 8 Notre Dame as they keep inching back up, just on the cusp of hosting territory. And I think if they get 11-1, they'll get there. But right now, if things were as they stood, it would be traveling to Tennessee.
Which is nuts. Notre Dame at Tennessee would be a fantastic matchup.
That would be an absolutely amazing matchup. You're absolutely right. So that's our first matchup here, Notre Dame, Tennessee. Miami in the 4 seed would face the winner of Boise State and the 5 seed, probably Ohio State, in a neutral site. But again, I just want to go back to that SEC log jam, Garrett, and we'll have more time to talk about this as BYU checks in at number 6.
Come on.
So your Cougs moving up. They were number 9 last week, I think. Got a little bit of respect by squeaking by Utah in the rivalry game. But they'll be the 3 seed this week, so it's up a spot in the seeding as well.
Yeah, I really like this for BYU, and I'll probably break some of this down, over the next couple of weeks as we start to have these conversations about the playoff. But BYU, I think, is getting hate for almost no reason. They say that they're not really beating anybody. They don't really look that good. They look about as good as you can look based on who they played. I know that they survived the rivalry game. Reminder, rivalry games are rivalry games. I don't think anybody will be complaining in a couple weeks, when Texas and A&M play. Either of those teams could get out of there with a point win, and I think either of those teams would be happy to win the game. That applies to the Iron Bowl. That applies to the Egg Bowl. that applies to any of these games coming down the stretch. So rivalries are rivalries. BYU looks pretty dang good, and I'm excited to see that they're finally getting a little bit of respect for being undefeated.
I'm guessing we'll see Penn State here. Indiana. Wow. Okay, so Indiana's a top 5 team. That's amazing.
Good for Indiana.
I was hoping that Penn State would slot in at 5 and we get Indiana above Penn State, but I'll take Indiana being a top 5 team in November. That's just an amazing story. 10 wins for the first time in program history, controlling their own destiny as they head into Columbus next week.
So this, I mean, just by extension means we're going to have 4 of the top 5 Big Ten teams.
Yeah. Did you see the graphic that somebody put out? I think it was John Chavis's son, big Tennessee fan. And he basically said, yeah, it seems like if you want to up your resume that you should have scheduled 5-5 Michigan, because all the teams that are above Tennessee, I guess, except for BYU, had Michigan on the schedule. And that's kind of one of the, except Penn State. Penn State did not play Michigan and will not play Michigan. But most of them, as Penn State checks in at number 4 and the 6th seed, most of them have Michigan on that schedule. Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, and Texas.
Yeah, that seems to be a good strategy. And it's funny because, you wouldn't think scheduling the defending national champion is typically a good, project for you. And that's not typically a great idea, but it's working out this year with all the turnover. I love some of these matchups. I love the fact that in this reality, Indiana hosts Alabama. I just like the fact that Alabama would have to go on the road to go play Indiana, as well as you're having Penn State hosting Ole Miss, it's Tennessee hosting Notre Dame. We'll see what happens at Boise here in a second. But yeah, it's fun. And I guess they just announced Texas slotting in there as well.
Yeah, Texas slotting in the 3 slot. I'm going to go ahead and get our ticker going here, Garrett, with the top 25 or the top 15, at the bottom, because I think we can all surmise that it's going to be Ohio State at 2 and Oregon in the 1 spot.
I'd be shocked if it wasn't.
If it's not, then they completely abandoned head-to-head that they did the entire way through. Right. That's kind of silly. But let's go ahead and get that going there. Let me.
Yeah, there it is.
Going. There we go. Yeah, so there's our banner there. I thought that was going to be a ticker. My bad. We'll see.
Here, I can switch that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Garrett's way better at the technical side of this than I am. There we go. Look at that. So yeah, that'll scroll through and it's counting down. That's fine. That's totally fine. We're working out some kinks here on this live show, but yeah, I mean, there it is. Ohio State coming in. They'll be the 5 seed. 4 Big Ten teams, and they, like you said, Garrett, are all in the top 5. 4 SEC teams and 1 each from the ACC, Big 12, and Mountain West, with Notre Dame and Independent joining the field as well. It's very interesting to see the level, just the level of respect that the committee is giving to those 2 conferences so far. A lot of talk has been made about the SEC being down because no one's running the table. That's interesting to me. The logic there doesn't necessarily follow. That might be a conversation for a preview show, but it's very interesting just to see the weight. I think we all thought that it could look like this, but to see it out on paper that it's very likely that the ACC and Big 12 only get their champion into the field at this point, it's another thing to see that play out on paper and see how that actually looks.
Yeah, I can't imagine a world where that actually happens, mostly because there's going to be some more cannibalization here down the stretch. There's going to be some teams that play each other. 2 of these teams for both conferences are going to have to play each other in their conference championship game. And then that goes into more things where, Indiana and Ohio State play. So one of those 2 teams is going to win another game. One of those teams will drop a game. Tennessee and Georgia play, so that's one where I guess Georgia's technically out right now, but if Georgia goes in there, beats Tennessee, they hand them a second loss, that could be another drop. And as some of those teams start to drop, you are going to see other teams just kind of rise up and join that group. So look for a team like an SMU, I think has a really good chance to kind of sneak in as somebody else drops out. I think that could be a really interesting one to look at. Obviously going to be watching a lot of teams in the SEC as well. Teams like A&M just on the outside that have a chance to, control their own destiny. Reminder, if A&M wins out, they can go to Atlanta, they can go in the conference, and they would slide all the way up into one of those top 4 seeds that grabs, the bye. So this still isn't over. There's still a lot of teams sort of in that, I would say probably 7 or 8 range all the way up to 15, 16 that could still control their own destiny and find their way into the playoff, even into a bye, if they can just win a couple of games here. So, I'm not projecting anything. I'm not saying A&M's going to run the table. I'm just saying it's still possible. And so I don't think we only get one from the Big 12, one from the ACC. I think we're going to get maybe 3 total. I wouldn't be shocked if we get 3.
You're still on the bandwagon that we'll get 3 total teams from those 2 conferences.
Yeah, I think you can still get 3 from those 2 because I think
your big thing right now.
Well, and Notre Dame. I think the big thing is it's going to be hard to keep out. I think SMU is your wild card right here because I can't imagine a world where, and maybe I'm wrong about this, I just can't imagine a world where the rankings stay locked up like that. You could also see a situation where SMU wins the conference, and in that case, I don't think Miami drops all the way out of the top 12. I just can't imagine the way that the committee's looked at Miami this year. Can't imagine them dropping all the way outside the top 12. Maybe it happens. I guess I wouldn't be necessarily shocked. They did drop to 9 this week after their loss, but I don't know. I would imagine them finding a way to keep them in there at 12 or something like that.
11-1. So I think if they would have lost the conference championship game, and they probably would have been ranked top 4 going into that game, I think it would have been hard sell to see them drop all the way out of the top 12. But I think they lost their cushion there, man. Like I would really honestly be shocked if Miami loses again and they're still in the college football playoff. A 2-loss ACC team.
And imagine a 2-loss SMU, but your 2 losses are to 2 conference champions who are probably in those top. I mean, that could be a realistic scenario where SMU's losses are to conference champion Miami and conference champion BYU.
Yeah.
It's going to be a really hard argument to say that SMU shouldn't be in there over, 10-2 Ole Miss or 10-2 Alabama or 10, like whoever is one of those 10-2 SEC teams. It's going to be really hard to make the case that, well, your only losses are to those 2 teams. You have some big wins on your record. You've been playing about as good as anybody. It's really hard to make that argument, in my opinion. So, I'm not going to pretend that I know. Clearly, they don't value them enough right now to slide them up there, but I don't know. They could make some noise. They could figure it out down the stretch.
I think you're running into a math problem, though. I think that's the only thing, because this logjam of SEC teams is going to be a huge, huge issue for anybody that wants to be a second team out of the Big 12 or the SEC, because those resumes are going to get scrutinized. And you look at Georgia, right? Georgia's the first team out right now. And if it comes down to it, a Miami team that lost to SMU and I already forgot the loss this week. Georgia Tech, thank you.
Yeah.
Versus a Georgia team that would have beaten Georgia Tech, right? And
you have to imagine.
And if they lose to Georgia Tech, it's a point. But a Georgia team that would have only lost to Ole Miss and Alabama, 2 teams that looked solidly in right now. That's a tough sell for the Miami side of that argument. And I think they're going to be fighting an uphill battle. And I think any team that you compare losses with, if it's a 2-loss SEC team that's fighting for that last spot with Miami, then it's going to be a losing battle for the Hurricanes in my mind.
Sure. And that's totally fair. I think SMU is the only real team that could make that 3rd spot happen.
They're just not getting the respect right now, though.
You think that one loss because they're playing really good football. Like, they've looked really good this year. They've scored a whole bunch of points. The defense has been up and down, but playing better. I think they're getting a little bit of disrespect here. I'm not necessarily going to jump up and down and say that SMU is definitely a top 12 team. I'm just saying, I think, end of the year, you'll kind of have to see how this works. The other thing that we're not really talking about is we've seen cannibalization already in the SEC. We've seen kind of how, the bottom to middle tier of the conference has actually played pretty high based on their expectations. I think you could still see one of these games end up in a massive upset spot. Like, circle Tennessee Vandy as a game to maybe be concerned about. And I'm not saying that Tennessee's worse than Vandy or has any business really even losing to Vandy, but Vandy's played pretty dang good, and they've, given some teams a run for their money. they could make that thing interesting. You think about Bama. Iron Bowl is never easy. I know Auburn's not good, but Iron Bowl's never an easy game. I know you get like Oklahoma and Mercer outside of that, so there's not really necessarily a lot to mess up there. But I mean, I don't know. Like crazier things have happened so far in the SEC. And I wouldn't be shocked to see a little bit more cannibalization going for the end of the season. I know we're running out of games for that to happen, but it just wouldn't necessarily shock me to see any of these teams slip up again.
That part I will totally agree with you there. I think it would be not shocking to see one of those teams slip up. Man, it's going to be really interesting to see, because I think dream here with me, because I think if BYU loses before the conference championship game, I think you're looking at the ACC, and I think the Big 12 might sneakily be the side that could get 2 in. Because if BYU wins out but then loses to Colorado in the conference championship game, are they going to fall from 6 or 5 or whatever they're at to all the way out? I think they are now in the catbird seat that Miami would have enjoyed had it been, had they taken care of business against Georgia Tech.
Yeah. And I mean, if their one loss is to a conference champ, it would be hard to slide them all the way out. Also, because in those, couple of weeks leading up to it, it's hard to imagine a world where BYU doesn't scoot up a couple spots. One of Indiana, Ohio State's about to lose. Penn State could still drop a game somewhere in there. So looking at that, it's hard to imagine a world where BYU doesn't slide up maybe one more spot. I mean, I'd hate to say that if Indiana beats Ohio State, they'd jump ahead of Ohio State, but that would be a 2-loss Ohio State team at that point. I think you'd have to find a way to make that fair. So if BYU even can find a way into the top 5 by the time that they get to their conference championship, I think you might be right that even if they lose, they might slide all the way back to like 11 or 12, but they're not going to slide all the way out.
Garrett, let's go ahead and throw the graphic up on the screen, because we have the college football playoff bracket here. Here's what it would look like in the first round if you didn't see it on the screen, as we've already gone back to basketball on ESPN. Let's go Duke tonight. Get that cover for me. So our first round games, you mentioned Notre Dame at Tennessee, a couple of blue bloods of the sport, right? Traditional powers of the sport, former champions. That game in Knoxville would be absolutely nuts, playing for the right to play Oregon in a bowl game. Alabama at Indiana on the other opposite corner of the bracket. That's just amazing. I really hope that we get something like that. An SEC team, couple SEC teams, as we have Ole Miss at Penn State, having to go up to colder weather. That's one of the things that I'm really interested in the college football playoff in this era of playing the first round games at home. And then, of course, the 12-5 matchup, Boise State at Ohio State. Ashton Jeanty, could he get it done against a team like Ohio State? It would be really interesting to see. It would be really, really interesting to see. What catches your eye in those is I'm going to calculate some back of the napkin math here on some projected spreads of what this would be with the SP+.
I think the thing that I like the most is each of these little trios. I really enjoy the matchups, right? There's no situation, I think, in this scenario where I'm really that upset, because, I mean, think about any of these matchups. Take BYU, for example. BYU would have the bye, but they would then get either Ole Miss or Penn State, which are both kind of the perennial almost there teams, right? Ole Miss, Penn State is, you can almost call it the bowl game of almost there, but not quite good enough teams, right? They're always on the cusp, third in the conference, not quite there. They're going to benefit from this format, obviously, but either of those teams would then get a chance to go play BYU, and I think they'd have a lot to prove, chip on their shoulder, but then you get BYU with their kind of team of destiny kind of thing going on this year. I just like all of these matchups. Oregon getting to host either Notre Dame or Tennessee, that's just like the big name matchup, right? Like there's just a bunch of big brands that everybody's a fan of, and they have fans nationally, and like everybody knows an Oregon fan, or at least someone who claims to be an Oregon fan. Everybody knows someone who likes Notre Dame. Everybody knows someone who's a Tennessee Volunteer, right? It's just kind of a fun thing. Same deal even with like Miami, Ohio State, and then they get matched up with Boise State, which, obviously Boise State, the G5 team, but you're right, Ashton Jeanty, about as fun as it gets. Just kind of fun. A lot of fun teams here. A lot of fun matchups, possibly. This is why I was such a fan of this format, was because I knew that we would get these types of matchups, these types of intriguing, which games are we going to get? Who's going to have to go where? I don't know. It's going to be fun.
It's certainly going to be fun. And remember, kids, there were people that didn't want you to have this. They said that this is too many teams and this first round isn't going to matter. There's going to be too many blowouts. I'm stalling here a little bit, Garrett, as I keep doing my back of the napkin math. But, man, seeing all those brands and seeing just the intriguing road trips. If we got something like this in year one, already having 2 really intriguing road trips, really 3 if you want to talk about Notre Dame going into Tennessee. I know Notre Dame already played at an SEC stadium this year, week 1 against Texas A&M, but having to go into another one of the just cathedrals of the sport with your season on the line, that's really interesting to me. And seeing Alabama play at Indiana, that would be I would love to see that.
And it seems like those 2 teams are super far away, because you think like, oh, Notre Dame, they're like all the way up there, and then Tennessee is like way in the south, but they're really not that far away. So you get some kind of fun regionality for that stuff, and I think that'd be an interesting through line as well. But it's kind of funny to look at some of these as like potential matchups going forward, because you think like, okay, Alabama, Texas, that's a game that obviously we're not going to get this year during the season. Texas misses Bama on the schedule. But that would be a fun one to see, right? That's one that we haven't gotten this year. That'd be a fun one to see if they could figure that one out. You think like Ohio State, Miami, we're used to those 2 brands being just these massive brands, kind of historically good, struggled maybe in recent years to get all the way up over the hump. Obviously, Ohio State's had more success recently than Miami has, but neither team really getting over the hump in the last, 5 to 10 years. And, since Ohio State won their last championship, it's just kind of a fun group. It's a fun list of matchups. There's not really any matchup here that I'd be like, yeah, well, that's okay. Kind of a throwaway. I don't really want to watch that one. Like, these are all fun games.
Yeah, I got some lines for you now. Thanks for stalling for me while I did my
I'll get it, man. That's what I'm here for.
Not a math major, so I'm a little slow. Boise State at Ohio State obviously would be the biggest spread. It would be, according to the SP Plus, 21.5 points for Ohio State at home.
Wow.
Tennessee would be a 1.5 point favorite, according to the SP Plus, against Notre Dame. Alabama would be a 4.5 point road favorite at Indiana. And Ole Miss would be a 1 point favorite on the road at Penn State, according to the SP Plus, factoring in about 2.5 points just as a blanket home field advantage. In reaction to that, that's 3 really close spreads. I don't know that Vegas would necessarily be that close, but from the analytics, from the nerds, saying that we get at least 3 potentially really close barn burner of a game in the first round.
I think that's cool, because it shows some respect to teams that I don't think we normally get respect for, right? I think it's easy to kind of look at these and say, well, okay, well, Notre Dame, they always get in the playoff and they never do anything. But it's cool to see that they're getting some respect against Tennessee. It's cool that Indiana's getting respect against a perennial powerhouse in Bama, right? Bama's a little bit down this year. They haven't quite shown us the same Bama that they have been. Maybe playing a little bit better recently, but not the same Bama team we've seen in years past. Cool to see Indiana get a little respect there. And then obviously we got to see Ole Miss Penn State, but to watch it again as a rematch, slightly different makeups of the teams. Both teams done a really good job kind of getting what they need. I don't know, just kind of fun. That's the thing that I keep going back to, is this is just fun. And what it shows as well, kind of talking about those groups that are out, clearly there's plenty to play for down the stretch. And I'm so glad that we're getting to talk about this instead of having to talk about like, well, okay, Oregon, but maybe Ohio State if they beat them later. Okay, well, like Texas, but like I guess whoever wins the SEC, like we've had to do in the past when it comes to the 14 playoff, like that's just about the buys, right? We're just talking about buys at that point. There's all these other matchups, these other games, which means that these games down the stretch really matter. Georgia, Tennessee this weekend is a huge game, not just because it's the 2 teams that we're used to seeing, and Georgia, Tennessee is always a fun one to watch, but that really matters. And that's, Georgia's probably last best chance to jump back into this thing. If not, Georgia could be eliminated this weekend.
Yeah, Georgia will be eliminated with a loss this weekend unless absolute chaos breaks out. Garrett, we'll get out of here on this. Looking through, and I can give you the teams rankings if you don't have it pulled up, but is there anyone other than Georgia that's currently outside of the field that you could see getting an at-large bid, rather than just fighting for their conference's auto bid?
Let me see.
I can name them off for you if you want.
I can probably find the list on Twitter here in a second, or X. Sorry, apologies.
College Football Playoff has it posted already too on their website.
Okay, yeah. So looking at kind of just the outside of that top group, I kind of mentioned SMU off the top. I could see them finding their way in. They have a lot of quality. I guess their losses are about as quality as they get. A&M could find their way through that logjam, right? They could find their way through the SEC logjam. A win against Texas would go a long way for Texas A&M. And then in terms of just like, auto bids outside of that, I don't really see a path for a lot of other teams.
At large bids.
At large bids. I don't really see a path for any of the other teams to get an at large bid. I mean, we talked a little bit very briefly about Washington State, that the path is slim, but I guess it's there. I just don't think that they'll have a quality enough win to get there. Army, maybe. Does Army get any respect if they get? Probably not.
Army's gonna have to win their conference. I do wonder if Boise State loses their conference, what happens, but I think that they're going to be out of luck.
Well, if they don't win their conference, they got 2 losses, so that's probably going to keep them out, yeah.
Yeah, I think the list is pretty short, man. I think it might be Texas A&M if they can go 10-2 in the regular season. Then if they go 10-2 in the regular season, they're going to Atlanta. And if they lose, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, how the committee treats a conference championship game loser. They obviously have a lot of work to do just to get there. But
I think realistically right now, A&M is probably your cutoff point for teams that can really make it. I think 15 is about as low down based on the teams that I'm seeing in the paths that are there.
Yeah, not as an at-large if you're just
not as an auto bid, But in terms of at-larges, A&M's probably your cutoff in terms of like that last team, that lowest ranked team that could probably make it in if things break the right way, if they beat the right teams, if the right teams lose. Like if Georgia loses this weekend, A&M's in a much better position. And then you got to, if you're A&M, you're hoping that, Bama doesn't look so good, Ole Miss doesn't look so good. Maybe they drop a game somewhere. You're hoping that a Notre Dame can lose. You're hoping that Miami could find a way to lose another game that helps SMU slide up, get the auto bid, but Miami looks worse. You're just starting to kind of talk about that as your path. But I think after that, for like a team like Kansas State or Colorado, I don't think outside of winning your conference championship, a 2 or 3 loss team in the Big 12 is going to find their way in.
Yeah, I think if you're below probably that A&M line, probably below 15, you're just rooting for a nuclear winter the next few weekends and see what happens. And you're obviously hoping to win out, of course. Well, Garrett, it was a great 30-minute conversation about the college football playoff rankings. Let us know what you think. Write in 3techpod@gmail.com. Make sure you're following us on social media at 3techpod on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube as well to keep up to date as we keep going down the stretch of this college football playoff season. And yeah, we're only just a few weeks away from Selection Sunday and getting to see the real thing. So for that man over there, Mr. Garrett Turney, I am Trey Reeves, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Gracious him. How about